Every movie monster you've ever feared came from one man, a Wisconsin farmer named Ed Gein. On November 16, 1957, police walked into his farmhouse in Plainfield, Wisconsin, looking for a missing hardware store owner named Bernice Worden. What they found inside that house would inspire 50 years of horror films: Norman Bates, Leatherface, Buffalo Bill. Every skin-wearing, mother-obsessed movie psycho traces back to this one man. But here's what those movies won't tell you. Ed Gein wasn't a monster. Or more accurate, he wasn't born a monster. He was manufactured by his mother, by his era, by a society that trapped women in abuse and isolated boys in dysfunction. This isn't a story about a sick freak who did sick things. It's a story about what happens when you take a woman crushed by Victorian morality, trap her with an abusive alcoholic, give her no escape, and let her raise a son in complete isolation while telling him the entire world is evil. Ed Gein was a product of the 1920s, his mother a product of the late 1800s, and both were products of a society that didn't care what happened in an isolated farmhouse as long as it stayed quiet. To understand Ed Gein, you have to understand his mother, because Ed Gein didn't create himself. Augusta Gein created the monster. Augusta Wilhelmine Lurke was born in 1878. It's the late Victorian era, a time when women had almost no rights, no autonomy, no power. She couldn't vote, she couldn't own property in most places, couldn't divorce without becoming a social outcast. If she wanted any kind of life, she had to marry. And marriage meant surrendering what little control she had to whatever man would take her. In 1899, she married George Gein. He was a violent alcoholic and drank away the little money they had. He was abusive, unreliable, and according to everyone that knew him, utterly worthless as a husband and a father. But Augusta couldn't leave. Divorce meant social death for a woman in the early 1900s. It brought poverty, shame, and being cut off from family and community. The few women who tried were treated as damaged good and failures. So Augusta was trapped, stuck on an isolated farm with a man she despised in a marriage that was slowly destroying her. And people, when trapped with no way out, are dangerous. They seek any power available to them. For Augusta, that power was religion and her two sons. She couldn't control her husband. She couldn't control her life, couldn't escape the system that imprisoned her. But she could control her boys, Ed and his older brother, Henry. Augusta became a religious fanatic. She preached constantly about sin, about a corrupted world, about how all women, except her of course, were whores and instruments of the devil. She read the Bible to her sons for hours every day. Not the kiddie version, the Old Testament, fire and brimstone, parts about wicked women leading men into damnation. She told them the world outside of the farm was evil, that other people would corrupt them, that women would destroy them like women destroyed all men. She isolated them completely. No friends, no social contact, no school activities, just a farm, the Bible, and Augusta's constant preaching about sin and damnation. Now, there's a critical thing to understand. Augusta wasn't born evil. She wasn't insane. She was doing what many people do when they're powerless. She became the enforcer of the system that oppressed her. Society told Augusta that women had value only through purity and motherhood. So she weaponized those things, made them the center of her identity, used them to gain the only power available to trap women in 1920s rural Wisconsin. Her sons were her domain, the only domain she had, and with religion as her sword, she ruled. Absolutely. Ed later said his mother was the best woman that had ever lived, that she was a saint, that every word she said was gospel truth. Because that's what kids do. They believe their parents, especially when those parents are their entire world. In 1940, George Gein died. I don't know how there was no autopsy. Not a single person mourned him, though. Not Augusta, not the boys. He'd been a burden, a source of shame and violence. His death was a welcome relief. Now it was just Augusta and her two sons on the farm. But in 1944, something happened. Ed's brother Henry died. The official story goes like this. They were burning a bush to clear the field, and they got separated in the smoke. Henry died of asphyxiation, probably overcome by the smoke. The details never quite added up. Ed led the police directly to Henry's body despite claiming he lost track of him. And Henry had bruises on his head that couldn't be explained by the fire. Henry had been talking about leaving the farm, about how their mother's control wasn't healthy, about how Ed needed to develop a life outside of Augusta's grip. And then, suddenly, he died. And now, with Henry gone, Augusta's grip on Ed was absolute again. No real investigation was ever conducted. No charges were ever filed. This was 1944 in rural Wisconsin. Farm accidents happened all the time. Nobody looked too closely. And then on December 29, 1945, Augusta Gein died from a stroke. She was 67 years old. Ed was 39. He spent his entire life under control, never kissed a woman, never had a friend, never lived one single day as an independent person. His mother had been his entire universe. She was God, teacher, judge, and jailer, all at once. And now she was gone. Ed Gein boarded up the rooms she'd used, her bedroom, and of course, the living room where she preached. He left them exactly as she left them the day she died. He lived in a small section of the house, surrounded by a shrine to his mother. And that's when it really started to go sideways. In 1945, America offered a 39-year-old male with severe mental issues, alone on an isolated farm, absolutely nothing. No mental health care, no social services, no community support. If you weren't violent and you kept to yourself, society let you be. And that's what Ed did. He did odd jobs around town. He babysat for neighbors who said he was gentle with the children, and he worked as a handyman. People thought he was a weirdo and harmless. What they didn't know was that Ed, at night, was visiting cemeteries. He started robbing graves, exhuming bodies from women who resembled his mother and taking them back to the farmhouse. He wasn't a necrophiliac. This wasn't sexual. It was psychological. Ed was trying to understand the thing his mother had taught him to worship and fear, female body. She told him women were sacred and sinful, all at once, pure and corrupt, divine and damned. So Ed studied them, preserved them, made objects from their skin and bones. He was following her teachings. She taught him women's bodies were sacred objects, so he treated them as sacred objects. He was trying to recreate her, trying to become her, trying to understand what he'd been taught to worship. Between 1945 and 1954, Ed robbed dozens of graves. But then, sometime around 1954, grave robbing wasn't enough anymore. On December 8, 1954, Mary Hogan disappeared from the tavern she ran in Pine Grove, Wisconsin. There was blood. On the floor, they found a spent cartridge, but no body, so the case went cold. 3 years later, on November 16, 1957, Bernice Worden disappeared from a hardware store in Plainfield. Her son was a deputy sheriff, and he knew Ed Gein had been in the store that morning. He was talking about buying antifreeze. So the police went to the Gein farm to question Ed and to have a poke around. What they found inside is hard to describe. It's hard to say even. Bernice Worden's body hung in the summer kitchen, dressed like a deer, gutted and decapitated. Ed had put her head in a burlap sack. Her heart was in a pot on the stove. While searching the rest of the house, they found bowls made out of human skulls, chairs upholstered with human skin, a wastebasket made of human skin, lampshades made of human skin. He had masks made out of human faces, peeled and preserved. They found a corset made of a woman's torso. The skin was still attached. Leggings were made from the skin of a human leg. When they opened the paper bag, Mary Hogan's face stared back at them. They found 4 noses in a cup and 9 vulvas in a shoebox. Now, as if this wasn't disturbing enough, there's more. Ed had been wearing some of these items, playing dress-up at night, alone in the house. He'd put on the preserved faces and the skin suit and stroll around the farm. He later told psychiatrists that he was trying to create a woman's suit so he could become his mother. He didn't want her back. He wanted to be her. Now there's Jeffrey Dahmer and John Gacy insane. And then there's Ed Gein in the league, all on his own. He wasn't killing these women out of sexual desire. He was killing them to harvest materials to complete his transformation. He just did what mommy taught him: worship and fear women, see their bodies as sacred and profane all at once. So he treated them exactly as she taught him, as holy objects to be preserved, studied, and worn. Ed Gein confessed immediately. He was calm, matter of fact. He didn't understand why everyone was so upset. Yes, he'd killed 2 women, Mary Hogan and Bernice Worden, but the rest of the body parts came from the graves. He was evaluated by psychiatrists and found, I think rightfully so, incompetent to stand trial. He was suffering from schizophrenia, they said. Couldn't distinguish right from wrong. He was sent to the Central State Hospital for the criminally insane. 10 years later, in 1968, he was found competent. They put him on trial and found him guilty of first-degree murder for the death of Bernice Worden. But he was also found legally insane at the time of the crime. He spent the rest of his life in mental institutions and never caused any trouble. He died in 1984 at the age of 77. He never showed remorse, of course, because in his mind, he did nothing wrong. He was just following mother's teachings. He was being a good boy. In 1959, 2 years after Ed's arrest, a writer named Robert Bloch published a novel called Psycho. It was directly inspired by Ed Gein, a man living with his dead mother, a man who couldn't separate from her psychologically, a man who killed women. In 1960, Alfred Hitchcock adapted it into a film. Norman Bates, the Bates Motel, the famous shower scene. A boy's best friend is his mother. The movie was a massive hit, and suddenly Ed Gein became a commodity. In 1974, Tobe Hooper made the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, Leatherface wearing a mask of human skin, directly inspired by Ed Gein. In 1991, The Silence of the Lambs gave us Buffalo Bill, a killer making a suit from woman's skin, again directly inspired by Ed Gein.
It rubs the lotion on its skin or else it gets the hose again.
Countless other films, books, documentaries, and TV shows have used Ed Gein as inspiration. We took a real man, a real crime, real victims, and turned them into a blueprint for movie monsters. We made Leatherface chase teenagers, made Norman Bates stab Janet Leigh in the shower, made Buffalo Bill dance to Goodbye Horses. We turned real horror into entertainment, into popcorn movies, into fun. And what we lost in that translation is that Ed Gein wasn't a monster. He was what happens when society fails 2 people, 2 generations. Augusta Gein was trapped by Victorian gender roles that gave women no autonomy, no escape from abuse, no power except through the children. So she became a religious fanatic, used the only power available to her, crushed her son into an extension of herself. Ed Gein was raised in complete isolation by a mother who taught him women were sacred and sinful, that the world was evil, that he was only safe under her control. When she died, he was 39 years old with no ability to function independently, no understanding of how to process grief or loss, and no support, mentally or otherwise. So he broke. He tried to become her, tried to understand the female form that was so alien to him. And when Ed did the only thing he knew how, we didn't ask what happened to this man to make him commit these atrocities. We just thought, how can we make money from this? Sure, there were some academics that did the research, but broadly, we didn't examine the conditions that made Ed Gein Ed Gein. We didn't look at how we isolate people, how we trap women into abuse, how we fail to provide mental health care. We made them into Leatherface. We made them chase people with a chainsaw for 90 minutes. Because it's easier to make monsters into entertainment than to ask ourselves the hard questions. Of course, it's freaky and scary that he wore human skin and pounced around the farm in it. But what's more scary is what happens when we let people fall through the cracks for generations. When we trap women with no options and they break. When we isolate children with no intervention and they grow up damaged. When we ignore mental illness until it becomes violence. When we turn real tragedy into movie tickets. The real horror isn't what Ed did in that farmhouse. The real horror is that we learn nothing from it. We didn't examine how we isolate people, how we trap women in abuse, how we fail to provide mental health care. We improved it, or so we tell ourselves. But today, if someone's in crisis, we still isolate them, still make it nearly impossible to get help until it's an emergency. We learned to make better movies. We never learned to prevent new Ed Geins. We just made them into Leatherface, made them chase people with a chainsaw. It's easier to make monsters into entertainment than to ask what created them. Augusta Gein was a product of the late 1800s. Ed Gein was a product of the 1920s. Both were products of a society that didn't care what happened in isolated farmhouses as long as it didn't inconvenience them. We shouldn't turn real people into metaphors. We shouldn't turn tragedy into entertainment. But as of today, that's the only thing we can make sense of, because mental illness scares us. Thank you for watching. I'm Henry, and this was What Now?